Well, welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for clicking on yet another one of my videos and being here to watch this with me. Today, I'm going to do something that's a little unconventional for how I've been doing things. And what I mean by that is I've actually manuscripted what I'm about to present for you. Now, I don't normally do that. Typically I'll try to do a slideshow or something like that. But this was long enough and I feel like important enough that I wanted to be precise with the things that I say. Still may get off script. I'm known for doing that, but nonetheless, I just want you to know that if you listen to this and you think, man, this guy's boring, he sounds like he's reading a book, well, it's kind of because I am. So I do ask that you bear with me because, again, this, at least in my opinion, is a very important topic. So with that, let me go ahead and get going. It is a rare phenomenon in our day and age to see people completely united on an issue. And yet it seems we have ascended this impossible hill by pretty much the entire world being in agreement that we're tired of hearing about one thing: Taylor Swift. Taylor is already a polarizing music star who is insanely popular, but it turns out people are also pretty fond of her dating a football star. And so she's been at the forefront of all the news and social media outlets as of late. Well, the question to ask then, and it is a fair one, is this: if everybody is sick of talking about Taylor, why do a video about her? Why keep banging this proverbial drum that all of creation wishes would remain quiet at this time? And my answer is a simple one. It's because I haven't seen anyone yet address the elephant in the room regarding this girl and this topic. Allow me to explain. Taylor, who is now 33 years old, has been in the national music scene since she was 16 with the release of her first album in October of 2006. Now, over the course of her career, she's published 9 studio albums, won 11 Grammys, and holds 58 Guinness World Records. She's playing sold-out shows in NFL stadiums with her ticket prices averaging $254 each, and she is on pace to be the first artist in history to gross $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion in revenue off a single tour. So to say this woman is merely a popular artist is probably the understatement of the century. Taylor Swift is literally idolized, but more on that later. And while her fan base 17 years ago consisted primarily of teenage girls, now she's captivated women of all ages. To put this in perspective for you, while researching for this video, I found an AARP article with a subheading that said this, quote, AARP caught up with some seasoned Swifties during the last leg of her Eras tour, end quote. Well, Swifties being the official name for Taylor Swift fans. So her fan base runs now from preteen girls all the way to senior women. And while they are definitely the minority, I'd imagine there are probably at least 4 male Swifties running around somewhere in the world. Her fan base is undoubtedly dominantly female, though. And these women come from all walks of life, all types of backgrounds. And here's where I'm really headed with this. Some, if not many of them, are professing Christians. And that, my friends, is a problem. Now, before I continue, please allow me to distinguish something. I don't inherently think there's anything sinful about listening to music from non-Christian, or we may say secular, artists. I believe God has wired this world in such a way that he allows the common grace for things such as beauty to come from many sources, even from wicked sources. After all, our God is the God who once spoke through the mouth of a donkey, and as it's often been said, he can draw a straight line with a crooked stick. So while there may not be anything wrong with listening to secular music per se, there is very much wrong with buying a fancy outfit or multiple outfits, crazy expensive tickets, as noted above, driving for hours or even flying to stay a night or two in a hotel, and winding up spending the equivalent of 4 months of your mortgage payments to congregate with a bunch of God-hating feminists who are cheering on a message of God-hating feminism being propagated by none other than the Queen Bee herself, Taylor Swift. Now, those words may come as a shock to many of you who still have it in their minds that Taylor Swift is a 14-year-old Christian from Tennessee, here in the heart of the Bible Belt. But in recent years, she's made it evident that nothing could be further from the truth. For example, in 2014, she told The Guardian, quote, I didn't understand that saying you're a feminist is just saying that you hope women and men will have equal rights and equal opportunities. I've been taking a feminist stance without actually saying so, end quote. So by her own admission then, she is a feminist. Well, what's wrong with that, you ask? Everything. Now, this video is not meant to be a treatise on feminism versus patriarchy, but suffice it to say, feminism has accomplished such wonderful things in our nation as the destruction of the nuclear family and no-fault divorce, over 60 million babies aborted as a result of Roe v. Wade, and the continued promotion of the LGBT agenda. Feminism is basically code for Antichrist. And here we have Swift admitting she is that. Now, lest you be tempted to think I'm reaching and she doesn't actually support those godless causes, listen to what she said in her 2018 documentary, Miss Americana. Speaking about Marsha Blackburn, a conservative Presbyterian woman who is running for Senate, Swift said this, quote, "I can't see another commercial and see Marsha Blackburn disguising these policies behind the words Tennessee Christian values. I live in Tennessee. I'm a Christian. That's not what we stand for." End quote. Well, what values is she talking about here? What was Blackburn supporting that Taylor had an issue with? Well, Swift brings clarity that same year in an Instagram post where she said this, quote, "I believe in the fight for LGBTQ rights and that any form of discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender is wrong," end quote. And in the same post, she said this about Blackburn's stance on traditional biblical marriage. She said, quote, "She also believes they should not have the right to marry. These are not my," all caps, "Tennessee values," end quote. So in 2018, Swift is clearly advocating for an unbiblical view of marriage. By the way, it's worth noting that because of her speaking out, an estimated 65,000 people registered to vote. So clearly she's an influencer, and not in a good way. In 2021, Taylor released re-recordings of previous albums, which included a newer 10-minute version of the song, All Too Well. Well, what improvements to the song were made, you ask? This line, quote, "You were tossing me the car keys, F the patriarchy, keychain on the ground, and I'll get older, but your lovers stay my age," end quote. Now, many of you may not be familiar with that word patriarchy, but it comes from a Greek word that simply means father rule or the rule of the father. Patriarchy is a term that encompasses the hierarchy and order in which God has made the world, namely a world of male headship. You see this in the Godhead as the Son submits to the Father. You see this in God's order of the home as the man is head of the woman, and so forth. And this isn't news, but in a 2023 feminist-plagued America, patriarchy has become the worst of all profanities, and that's because the world is and always has been hostile to the things of God. Michael Foster says in his book, It's Good to Be a Man, quote, "It's not a question of whether men will be ruling, but which ones and how," end quote. That's the world God designed, and the feminists, including Taylor Swift, hate it. Now, there are other examples I could cite, but I think you see the point. Swift has publicly endorsed an anti-Christian worldview, and she's taken countless thousands of her fans along with her. And what has been the effect, you ask? Well, listen to some of these quotes from an article titled, "I Found Religion at a Taylor Swift Concert," written in July of this year. The author, Steph, writes this, quote, "There was no church, there was no Bible, but there were hands raised in praise and jubilation, and there was music, the music of Taylor Swift," end quote. Steph goes on to write, quote, "I know at first blush that sounds ridiculous, like something a celebrity-crazed teenager would say, but for almost 4 hours, I stood in unity and harmony next to my sister, my daughters, and 60,000 others, most of whom were women, and together we lost ourselves. We let go. We were free. We wore short skirts and high boots, yet we were free from catcalls. We donned tight dresses, but we were free from criticism. We moved our bodies with total abandon, yet we were free from judgment. We screamed, 'Shade never made anybody less gay,' and 'F the patriarchy,' in unison, and no one rolled their eyes. We laughed and cried, sometimes both at the same time, and no one told us to calm down. We shed the weight of planning and caring for our families, and we traded friendship bracelets instead," end quote. Now, Steph finally lands the plane in this article by saying, quote, "I honestly don't know if I'll ever experience that same organic kinship, freedom, and safety ever again, not just at a concert, but in any setting, including church. Churches often tell their congregants to come as you are, weary or burdened, and that's how Saturday felt, but with extra sequins and sparkles," end quote. So in other words, 60,000 Swifties had a safe space to dress in an ungodly way, abandon their God-given responsibilities and duties as wives and mothers, scream out blasphemous obscenities that are directly opposed to God's view of marriage, gender roles, and societal order, all following the pattern of their worship leader, Taylor Swift, who is on video in that same concert saying, quote, "It's like we're not putting on a show for you, we're getting to put on a show with you," end quote. So Swift and her team are not innocent bystanders to the blasphemy going on. Rather, they are both promoting and participating in it. At this point, I should finally address the second subject in the video title, the Asherim, which is believed to be the plural form for the singular Asherah. Well, who or what is an Asherah or an Asherim, you may ask? Well, thousands of years ago, the ancient pagan land of Canaan was littered with false god worship, namely that of their chief god, Baal. Ashtoreth was the chief female goddess who was worshipped alongside Baal and believed to be his wife. Now, this could get a little clunky and convoluted, but stay with me. Ashtoreth was worshipped and represented by groves of poles that they would plant in the ground. These poles were called Asherah poles, and when speaking of them in the plural sense, they were called Asherim, similar to cherub, cherubim, singular and plural. So think of it this way. The Asherim were groves of Asherah poles, and these were sites of worship to the false god Ashtoreth, and they're referenced multiple times in the Bible. Well, you may ask, what relevance does this have to the discussion at hand? To which I'll reply, everything. Like many other pagan religions in those days, the worship ceremonies of Ashtoreth, they were very sexual and sensual in practice and involved widespread ritual prostitution. Now, this was such a serious thing that if any virgins were present who would not submit themselves to prostitution, they would be sacrificed to Ashtoreth. And this should surprise no one at this point, but Ashtoreth worship also involved homosexual activity, and they believed that this male-on-male intercourse was a pleasant offering to their god. It's also worth noting that one of the other gods related to Baal and Ashtoreth was the god Moloch. And if you know anything about him, then you know it was to Moloch that people sacrificed their children in the name of worship. So please don't miss or dismiss the fact that in the worship of these pagan false gods, we see elements of child sacrifice, which in our day translates to abortion, as well as homosexuality, two of the primary things feminists pride themselves on supporting. Well, how did God feel about all this? Listen to these instructions God gave the Israelites for when they were to inherit the land. Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5 says, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons." Look at verse 4. "For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars, dash in pieces their pillars, and chop down their Asherim, and burn their carved images with fire." This was a clear-cut command for God's people. Destroy the Asherim. They were sites of worship dedicated to a goddess who was utterly and completely opposed to the true and living God Yahweh, and he would share his glory with no false god or idol among his covenant people. Well, guess how that played out? Well, under the leadership of a man named Joshua, the Israelites listened for a while. After all, it was Joshua who uttered these famous words imploring Israel to turn from those false gods and serve Yahweh. Joshua 24, 14 and 15. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I fear that today, many professing Christians have forgotten that a choice must indeed be made. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24 that you cannot serve God and money, And Yahweh said in Deuteronomy 5:7 that you cannot serve God alongside any other God. And sadly, this is exactly what we see in the way that the culture idolizes Taylor Swift. I told you we'd come back to that. Just as the Asherim were erected in groves to pay homage to Ashtoreth, so do the Swifties gather in groves to pay homage to their God, a female idol who stands for, speaks for, and represents many sinful things that are opposed to the true and living God. Now, we could discuss why this has happened. Suffice it to say, I blame it primarily on the men. After all, we're the ones called to lead homes, churches, and societies, and a failure to honor God in these arenas will inevitably lead to a failure in the culture as a whole. Again, read Michael Foster's book, It's Good to Be a Man. We could talk specifically about passive fathers who don't lead their families in the worship of the Lord. I have a daughter myself. It's my responsibility to teach her to look up to the tightest two women in her life or in the church at large, such as the Transformed Wife or the Moscow Crew, Nancy Wilson, Rachel Jankovich, etc., while simultaneously teaching her to avoid being influenced by the ungodly women in society like Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, and that lady who speaks for Joe Biden sometimes. Now, maybe I'm onto something there. Maybe the problem is that even in the church, there is such a shortage of godly, theologically sound women to look up to and be influenced by. Our church is plagued with the Beth Moores and the Christine Caines. Where are the solid women at? Maybe the pastors are at fault for teaching their congregations a bunch of fluff week in and week out instead of plumbing the depths of the Holy Scriptures and showing their congregations the glory and magnificence of God through expository preaching. Dare I say that even dispensationalism could be somewhat to blame. It can't be a mere coincidence that first wave feminism began within about 20 years of the rise of Darby and his defeatist teachings. And if I haven't made every head roll just yet, please let me suggest one more. Maybe it's due to the fact that there are so few husbands today who have the stones to look their wives in the eyes and tell them something completely insane, such as the word no. In a discussion like this, the problem really is multifaceted and difficult to pinpoint, but fortunately, I think here that the problem isn't necessarily as important as the solution. So let's talk about that. And this is the elephant, folks. Christians have got to stop hitching their wagons to and publicly supporting anti-God people, institutions, and activities. Now, we could name names like Disney and Target, but I'm not here to make a comprehensive list. I'm here to push a comprehensive principle. And the principle is this: whatever you do, do to the glory of God. And friends, it is not God honoring or glorifying to pay homage to the idols of our day. We can't have both. So let me return to Taylor and finish up. This isn't intended to be a hit piece on her. My hope is that someday she will repent and turn to Jesus Christ, that he would save her and renew her mind, and she would begin to walk the path of righteousness, that she would become a mouthpiece for the things God commands, much like Moses and Joshua. We all need to be praying that we see that day, but until that day comes, she is very much still playing for the other team. And friends, we cannot have 2 feet in the kingdom of God wearing a kingdom of darkness jersey with the name Swift on the back of it and think God is okay with that. God commanded his covenant people to smash the idols way back then, and friends, he hasn't changed his position on that for his covenant people today. We all need to take a deep inventory of our hearts, identify the areas we're out of alignment with gospel living, and we need to repent. We're all guilty of swerving. We all fall short, but we need to echo the words of Joshua and mean them. And I think that's a perfect way to close this out. So you choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. I want to know where I missed it here or where I got it right. I'd love to hear from you. But again, thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing with me. Y'all have a good day.